This is just a sample of the audiobook. To get the complete audiobook, access the link posted in the first comment.
An Introduction to the Work of Jeremy Bentham by Ross Harrison. 3 days after Bentham died in 1832, he was publicly dissected by his doctor. Outside was a thunderstorm. Inside, the doctor, his face as white as the corpse before him, gave a funeral oration before carving the body. Watching were many of the leading radical political thinkers and activists of the day. Then, after the body was dissected, its skeleton was padded out, reclothed in Bentham's clothes, and placed in a box with a glass front. Therefore, to this day, Jeremy Bentham can be seen, the very man himself, sitting in his box in University College, London. Other great philosophers have been buried. Bentham, in accordance with his own instructions, has been preserved. He has been preserved as what he called an auto-icon. The term comes from a pamphlet which Bentham wrote shortly before his death. He there discusses the best way of producing statues to commemorate important people. The answer is for people to be statues of themselves, auto-icons. The subtitle of the pamphlet is Further Uses of the Dead to the Living. For Bentham, use is central. Everything is to be valued according to the utility it provides, utility or happiness. The leading principle is that happiness is to be maximized. Chapter 1. Of the Principle of Utility. 1. Nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. It is for them alone to point out what we ought to do, as well as to determine what we shall do. On the one hand, the standard of right and wrong, on the other, the chain of causes and effects are fastened to their throne. They govern us in all we do, in all we say, in all we think. Every effort we can make to throw off our subjection will serve but to demonstrate and confirm it. In words, a man may pretend to abjure their empire, but in reality he will remain subject to it all the while. The principle of utility recognizes this subjection and assumes it for the foundation of that system, the object of which is to rear the fabric of felicity by the hands of reason and of law. Systems which attempt to question it deal in sounds instead of sense, in caprice instead of reason, in darkness instead of light. Extended footnote. Note by the author, July 1822. To this denomination has of late been added or substituted the greatest happiness or greatest felicity principle. This for shortness, instead of saying at length that principle which states the greatest happiness of all those whose interest is in question as being the right and proper, and only right and proper and universally desirable, end of human action in every situation, and in particular in that of a functionary or set of functionaries exercising the powers of government. The word utility does not so clearly point to the ideas of pleasure and pain as the words happiness and felicity do. Nor does it lead us to the consideration of the number of the interests affected, to the number as being the circumstance which contributes in the largest proportion to the formation of the standard here in question, the standard of right and wrong, by which alone the propriety of human conduct in every situation can with propriety be tried. This want of a sufficiently manifest connection between the ideas of happiness and pleasure on the one hand, and the idea of utility on the other, I have every now and then found operating, and with but too much efficiency, as a bar to the acceptance that might otherwise have been given to this principle. End of footnote. But enough of metaphor and declamation. It is not by such means that moral science is to be improved. 2. The principle of utility is the foundation of the present work. It will be proper, therefore, at the outset, to give an explicit and determinate account of what is meant by it. Footnote. The word principle is derived from the Latin principium, which seems to be compounded of the two words primus, first or chief, and cipium, a termination which seems to be derived from capio, to take, as in mancipium, municipium, to which are analogous auceps, forceps, and others. It is a term of very vague and very extensive signification. It is applied to anything which is conceived to serve as a foundation or beginning to any series of operations, in some cases of physical operations, but of mental operations in the present case. The principle here in question may be taken for an act of the mind, a sentiment of approbation, a sentiment which, when applied to an action, approves of its utility, as that quality of it by which the measure of approbation or disapprobation bestowed upon it ought to be governed. End of footnote.